Thank you. This is Tom Fitton with Judicial Watch, Elon. Appreciate your public service and your transparency efforts here. My concern is, as the head of a watchdog group, is the government corruption in response, not only to what you potentially may uncover, but in response to what you're doing. And when you have the President of the United States from the podium celebrate his election victory by calling for a national security review of your activities, you have senators, focusing on you. You have other government agencies investigating you and your other businesses. Are you concerned, A, about the retaliation, and B, are you seeing evidence of it already?
Well, government is slow to act. So this is the thing about it that's important to appreciate about anything government related, is that they're not nimble, they are slow. So I think the actions that we'll see, and I think there probably will be some actions, will happen, but they'll happen slowly. And it's only been a month so far, but I would expect some. There's probably at least a few nefarious things that are in the works right now. I'd say it would be naive to assume that there are no nefarious things. And so I guess but I will just expose them on Twitter and see what happens.
Well, the most important thing, you don't have any suicidal thoughts, do you, Elon?
I do not have any suicidal thoughts. If I committed suicide, it's not real.
Bro, that was dark.
That was a good one.
The extraordinary nature of these disclosures, I guess it would be difficult to overstate, in that, between what happened last week with the first batch and this batch, it shows that Twitter just wasn't, quote, lying and engaged in, misconduct that's unimportant. But, this is the sort of stuff that gets people sometimes thrown in jail when you lie to users and shareholders and regulators and Congress. So there are a few corporate heads who would have, put their company's head on the block like this. But certainly the prior management of Twitter, it seems to me, has significant legal issues they should be worrying about. Of course, the challenge is that the federal agencies are run by the Biden administration, and they support this type of misconduct, so they're unlikely to pursue it, and more likely, as we've been talking about, to pursue Elon Musk. My second point is this comports with everything I had gone through. I had tweeted several times a straightforward tweet: hydroxychloroquine is a safe drug. I didn't tie it to COVID. That's all I said. And I was repeatedly tweeting it, once a week or so. And at one point, someone complained about it, and Twitter in October of 2020 told me, we got this complaint, but it's fine. It doesn't violate our rules. Well, then on January 8th, they not only told me it violated its rules, they took it down and locked my account, and I refused to remove the tweet for several months afterwards. But in the meantime, I constantly appealed. They ignored the appeal. At one point, they said I was engaged in hate speech. And so it just shows you how arbitrary and capricious the whole process was for a major account like mine, which had been retweeted repeatedly by President Trump. And, I'm the head of a national watchdog organization as well. And thirdly, just to wrap up, I would suggest that, and I know Elon Musk talked about this in the last Twitter space, that, eventually all the documents are going to come out, but there are going to be these reports in the meantime. If I were him, I would focus on just getting all the documents out. We don't need any more gatekeepers that however honest they are in their reporting and whatever good faith activities they're undertaking to try to get the truth out to as many people as quickly as possible. There are always going to be more questions, not only by those like us, but by the enemies on the outside. And the best way to overcome that is to, maybe highlight the documents that you found that are important after review of all the documents that are potentially releasable, and just release them all at once. I mean, that's what Judicial Watch does. And we highlight the documents we think are important, but we post them all for everyone to see. And as long as these documents aren't given to the other media, they have an excuse not to report on them. And so we can complain they're not going to report on it, but they have this journalism rule that they have to have the documents and access to the material before they report on it. So, I don't want to go too hardcore on it, but that would be my approach here. Because now everyone's going to be wondering, well, am I on the list? How are they going to figure that out? How long are we going to wait for that? And if I were him, I'd say, let's get all these documents together, put them out there. We can have favored reporters and folks that we think will give them a fair and honest review, look at them to help people guide them through the mess of documents. But we just need to get them all out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Tom, if I could ask you really quick, did you notice a distinct decrease in engagement on your Twitter profile once President Trump began interacting with you and retweeting you and so forth?
Yeah, I thought it was pretty remarkable because how many followers did he have? 65 million or something?
At the time, yep, about that. Mm-hmm.
And I would get virtually no increase in followers.
Wow.
And, I thought something was up. I couldn't put my finger on it. And so I think they were suppressing his reach as much as mine at that point, because it didn't make any sense that an account that big, even with a lot of, automated followers, as I'm sure an account like that had, wouldn't result in a big increase. I would get more organic growth of my Twitter account. From my own tweets as from his retweets. It was really remarkable. All of that has changed since it was announced Twitter was going to be purchased by Elon Musk. I suspect they turned off a lot of these tools for when he first announced it, and the engagement and the follower counts, and I'm sure you're seeing this too, are increasing, in ways that I've never seen before since I've opened the account. First of all, it is big what came out today. I mean, what we had is documentary evidence that they were lying to users and to regulators and to members of Congress about their conduct as a corporation. And I think also what's important about this is that, we're concerned about the FBI and collusion with government and the campaigns. But you can see in the materials by Roth and the discussion points they had about libs of TikTok is that they've incorporated into their algorithms and they had incorporated into their algorithms and into their policies and procedures for accounts this partisan and ideologically to the left approach to misinformation. And so you don't need Joe Biden to say take this tweet down. They've got it baked into the cake, or they had it baked into the cake. And so that's why it's important this internal material comes out, because it shows that at one point they didn't need to speak to outsiders to know what to do, because they had the systems in place to curtail the speech that they all knew they didn't want spread. And, by way of background, many years ago, I don't know how many years ago, but, I've been involved in conservative movement for longer than I care to admit to. But before this whole issue of censorship began, Facebook and Twitter started dipping their toes into trying to regulate the content in response to online Islamic terrorist organization. And they were fearful about going there. They didn't know what to do. They were looking for support, obviously from conservatives. That's how I found out about it. And because they knew that these terrorist groups were using their platforms to organize online. And isn't it interesting how that quickly metastasized into this. I don't know who was speaking earlier about the national security state, but that entire approach with respect to Russia that had a partisan and fake news approach to Russian intervention in our elections used as an excuse to censor all sorts of Americans. And then we have someone like James Baker, former general counsel for the FBI, become a top lawyer for Twitter. Someone who had been compromised because of his prior, what I believe, strong evidence of misconduct while I was over at the FBI, then in a position to continue to cause more damage to his ideological and political opponents at Twitter. And as has been suggested in the various Musk and Taibbi tweets, he may have interfered with this process here. So it's really been a kind of a remarkable arc where they began trying to moderate content largely in the political space to restrict terrorist organizing, and it quickly began or turned into we need to censor anything the establishment doesn't like. And contrary to my colleague who was speaking earlier, the establishment tends to be very left to center. And in this case, we're in a revolutionary moment, I believe. And we have this unholy mix of radicals in academia and in the private sector working with partisans, Democrats mostly, who see opportunities to suppress their opponents by embracing this radical attack on free speech and the First Amendment. And this is why they wanted to destroy Musk, because he could blow all that up.
Joining me now, Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton. And Tom, this is a wide-ranging story, right? I mean, it's a lot more than a Hunter Biden aspect to it. But let's start there, because that was the key focus. In real time, everyone knew what was going on. It was denied by everyone involved. What do you make of what we've learned so far?
Well, it was a public service that Musk performed in allowing these corporate documents to see the light of day. He not only has admitted, frankly, to Twitter corporate corruption there, but this collusion with the DNC and the Biden campaign to target free speech and to withhold information about Hunter Biden and Joe Biden corruption shortly before the election. And, the left's response is really hilarious. They're angry at Elon Musk for exposing corporate corruption and political corruption. And we know this is the tip of the iceberg. Judicial Watch separately found that the California Secretary of State's office was going through Twitter to censor and try to take down material about election integrity debates. And we know it's continuing to happen with the Biden administration reportedly still having special access to Twitter to try to censor material. And the Biden administration, the veil's been lifted. They support censorship outright, which explains why they've been so critical and so willing to abuse their power to target Musk and his businesses.
One of the things they point out is the contributions to the Democratic Party by Twitter employees in 2018, 96%, 2020, 98%. 2022, 99.7%. It's okay, I guess you can contribute to the party that you choose, but it's pretty clear that they felt like they were also agents for the Democratic Party.
That's right. You have this explicit collusion that's being uncovered through this recent reporting, these recent disclosures. But when you hear these former Twitter folks talk, they've incorporated, they don't even need to talk to outsiders, they've incorporated the leftist Democratic analysis of what should be allowed on Twitter and big tech generally. So they've got the algorithms in place, some of which have been turned off by Musk, to censor speech that upsets the left and upsets the Biden regime. And this is the concern that, it's one thing to have a private company engage in this misconduct, but when they're working with an administration or working with deep state agencies such as the FBI before the election, which also I think needs to be disclosed by Musk and his team. That's a dangerous assault on our First Amendment freedoms.
What do you make, Tom, of the media covering up the cover-up? They're just looking the other way. They're not even talking about this.
Yeah, well, one way for that to be solved is that they're using the excuse, we don't have the documents, right? So Musk could release all of these documents so everyone could go through them and the media no longer have an excuse. Of course, the media was happy to suppress this information as well, and they performed on behalf of the DNC and the Biden campaign just as much as Twitter did in terms of suppressing and misleading Americans about the nature of the revelations in the Hunter Biden laptop. And of course, it wasn't just about the Hunter Biden laptop. Anyone who criticized the way the elections were being run were also being censored. And of course, then you had the COVID censorship since then.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of free speech, variations of free speech under assault here.
Yeah, I was kicked off for like a week or 10 days and never knew why or even how I got back on. Hey, I got 30 seconds left. Anything important that you think we might hear or legal ramifications?
Well, I think if we find out more about government involvement here, you're going to have American citizens who are going to be thinking about lawsuits against those responsible for suppressing their First Amendment freedoms and abusing their authorities under law.
Oh, boy. I'm just so thrilled this is happening. It's just so sad that it confirms the worst fears of a lot of people. Tom, thank you very much. Appreciate you.
In many places, we are able to vote, or you're able to vote early, which I think is a terrible thing. I think you should be able only to vote on Election Day. And to the degree we have mail-in balloting, it should only be done in extraordinary circumstances. You know, if you're in the military or deployed overseas, you know, or otherwise have significant emergencies, you need a really good excuse to do a mail-in ballot. That's the way it should be. I think typically you should be voting in person on one day, and we should be deciding the winner on Election Day. And of course, vote by mail has significant concerns about fraud, which also need to be addressed and which many of the left refuse to address. And frankly, too many Republicans don't want to address as well. But one of the other big issues with vote by mail is how long you count the ballots for. I mean, is there a time when you stop? And is the time reasonable? And is the time compliant with the law? Is the deadline compliant with the law? And in Illinois, we alleged that contrary to federal law, Illinois is unlawfully counting ballots up to mail-in ballots that arrive up to 14 days after the election. So up to 2 weeks after Election Day, ballots are coming in, and their theory is that if somehow the ballot is signed on Election Day or beforehand, but even if the postmark is undated, they'll count it for up to 2 weeks. I mean, besides the horrible policy of that in terms of encouraging fraud, waste, and abuse, in our lawsuit that we filed to try to stop it on behalf of a congressman and some other citizen voters of Illinois, the congressman is Congressman Bost, it's illegal under federal law, we alleged. And we had this litigation's ongoing. I don't know when the court's going to rule. I don't know if the court in theory could rule before Election Day, or it could rule after Election Day. But it would change the rules if we're successful. Certainly for the year 2024. I don't know what would happen in 2022. So I know there's great concern about the election counting that goes on seemingly forever, practically speaking, after Election Day, and it's just a terrible policy. I think for obvious reasons. Don't you agree? And in addition, it's illegal because the federal law that we highlight, I think it's 3 U.S.C. Section 7. My colleagues will confirm that to me, and I'll fix it if I'm wrong. Basically says that Election Day is on Election Day for members of Congress, and similarly, it's Election Day is Election Day for the presidency. So this year it would affect election races at the federal level in Congress in 2024. Obviously, the presidency would be included as well. Now, the left tried to intervene in this lawsuit as a defendant. Now, what does that mean? It means they're trying to gum up our lawsuit by trying to come in and make it more difficult for us to litigate, because the lawsuit is against the essentially the election officials in Illinois, the Secretary of State and the Illinois State Board of Elections, and the Democratic Party of Illinois, represented by the law firm that founded by Mark Elias, the controversial former Clinton campaign lawyer, caught up in Russiagate, tried to intervene, and the court said no. The Democratic Party of Illinois cannot meet its burden to show that its interests will not be adequately represented by the parties to the case. As a result, the Democratic Party of Illinois is not entitled to intervene as of right. Separately, because allowing them to intervene would threaten to delay this time-sensitive case further, the court, in its discretion, denies their motion seeking permission to intervene as a party under Rule 24B. Accordingly, the court denies the Democratic Party of Illinois' motion in its entirety. So here you had Mark Elias, the king of Democratic election lawyers, try to intervene for the Democratic Party, in our case, to muck it up, and the court said no. So the case is proceeding, and this is what the gravamen of the lawsuit that Judicial Watch has filed is about. The current Illinois election law allows vote-by-mail ballots received up to 14 days after the polls close on Election Day to be counted as if they were cast and received on or before Election Day. Illinois law also provides that even vote-by-mail ballots without postmarks shall be counted if received up to 14 calendar days after Election Day if the ballots are dated on or before Election Day. I mean, obviously inappropriate. Our lawsuit notes that the board was advised that the number of ballots received after Election Day through November 17, 2020 could materially affect the unofficial election results. Illinois' own data indicates that Illinois received 266,417 vote-by-mail ballots statewide during the period from November 3rd through November 17th. Most of the vote-by-mail ballots were received after Election Day, which would mean that as many as 4.4% of the votes cast in 2020 were received after Election Day. I mean, what if you showed up to vote the day after the election in person and said, you need to count my vote. I knew who I was going to vote for yesterday, and I want you to count my vote today. I mean, and what the less argument is that, well, the vote really is cast if it's mailed before Election Day. First of all, if it's undated, you don't know when it's mailed. But if it's cast, then why does the law, generally speaking, allow you to go in and change your vote before Election Day? If it's already been cast, how can you change it? So they can't have their cake and eat it too. And it's just terrible policy. If you're going to vote by mail, make sure it gets there by Election Day. That's when it's supposed to be counted. That's what we argue in the lawsuit, at least. Judicial Watch argues that holding voting open for 14 days past Election Day violates the constitutional rights of voters and candidates by counting untimely and illegal ballots received after Election Day and diluting plaintiffs' timely cast and received ballots. Defendants, which is the state of Illinois here, acting under color of law, as it deprived and are depriving our clients of rights protected under the First Amendment and 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution in violation of 42 U.S.C. Section 1983. It's a civil rights claim. So the Democratic Party failed to gum up this important lawsuit for election integrity. And, you know, as I said in our press release, we're supposed to have an election day, not election weeks or election months. Illinois' 14-day extension of Election Day beyond the date set by Congress is illegal, violates the civil rights of voters, and encourages fraud. Now, as I highlighted last week, Delaware, the Supreme Court there threw out a state vote-by-mail and same-day voter registration statute that violated Delaware's Constitution. So we're not alleging that, you know, they broke the law in the sense that there's a constitutional prohibition in Illinois on this necessarily. We're highlighting that this violates federal law and violates the constitutional rights under the federal system of voters when you start counting ballots way past Election Day like this. I mean, this is straightforward. So this is an important lawsuit, and it's one of many that Judicial Watch has to defend the rule of law on elections and to protect election integrity. We have lawsuits to clean up election rolls that are ongoing in Pennsylvania, in Colorado, in New York. We have a lawsuit related to getting access to election rolls. Another lawsuit in Illinois too. So we've got two lawsuits in Illinois. We filed a successful lawsuit in Maryland over rigging elections under gerrymandering. We stopped that and made sure that in that case it was the Democratic Party wasn't able to rig elections in Maryland and restricted that. So that was a great victory. These lawsuits to clean up election rolls led to massive cleanups in North Carolina and in California and in Kentucky. And I know in Pennsylvania, for instance, we sent a letter to one state saying you haven't cleaned up the rolls, and they said, thank you, we just cleaned up 69,000 names. So we do know that other states clean up their rolls when we say there's a problem here. As even though I object to vote by mail, one of the reasons that I object is because I know the voting rolls are a disaster. They're hard to keep track of, and the best way to mitigate against having dishonest or dirty election rolls is to have folks vote in person. And the best way would be to have them present a voter ID, but that's a whole other matter. So the voting rolls are a mess in too many states, and Judicial Watch is doing its darndest, often successfully, to clean them up. So this core issue, though, was at the heart of a lot of disputes about 2020. Anyone who's observed vote by mail and counting ballots after Election Day, they know it's a problem. People don't trust the result when you start changing numbers after Election Day as a result of continued vote counting. That was the whole dispute about 2020. I shouldn't say the whole dispute, but it was a key dispute about 2020, where the President of the United States had a certain number of votes on Election Day, Trump did, and if they had counted all the votes they had, if they counted the votes they counted on Election Day showed that he was winning. And the vote totals changed, and he, quote, lost after Election Day as a result of additional vote counting that was conducted in an unprecedented fashion. So as a result, people don't trust the results. And in addition, there's legal problems with it, as we're alleging in Illinois. Now, YouTube is going to censor me if I say that fraud had a material impact on the 2020 election. And I'm not saying that in this case. What I'm saying is there are legal disputes about the counting of ballots after Election Day. And the left would have you believe, don't ignore the law, ignore the Constitution, and ignore plain common sense. And in my view, the left doesn't even like elections. I mean, we had this debate. I mean, if you want to see the absurdity of this elections craziness where you have early voting and vote by mail that take place 45 days ahead of an election. In Pennsylvania, had this big debate between the two candidates, Fetterman and Oz. And just think about that. I mean, people had voted already as far as a month before the debate. I mean, you could have voted for Fetterman and saw his behavior at the debate or his his obvious cognitive challenges and health challenges and said, boy, why did I vote for him? Or on the other hand, you could have seen Dr. Oz and said, I don't like what he's saying. Why did I vote for him? I should have known. It's too late. It's a terrible policy. I don't know why the left opposes, well, I do know why the left opposes Election Day. Because it provides more opportunities to game the system if you spread it out further. You provide access to the ballot 45 days ahead of time. The votes begin 45 days, as early as 45 days ahead of time. 2 weeks after Election Day, at least. Sometimes, I think it's up to 30 days in some jurisdictions. So you don't have an election day, you have election months. That's insanity. And to the degree it's unlawful, Judicial Watch is going to challenge it. So no, we haven't forgotten about election integrity. We haven't forgotten about the issues of 2020. We're trying to fix the structure of our election systems in a way that reassure the American people that their votes will be counted in an honest way and in a system in which they can have confidence in, no matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat or whatever. So, not only do we need to have systems in place to check fraud, but we need to reassure the American people that there's at least reasonable attempts made to check fraud. I know the left is crazed that, they talked about these modest changes in Georgia as being worse than Jim Crow. And now they're having to explain, well, if things are so terrible down there, why is voter turnout increasing? And it's no surprise to me that voter turnout is increasing in election systems where there is more security, because if people think their votes are going to count, they're more likely to vote. So what better way to encourage voter turnout than to provide systems in place and a way of counting that assures people that their votes are going to be counted, and that in the least there isn't the appearance that the system will be gamed. So this is a core issue. It's obviously going on now, but it's going to go on over the next 2 years, and Judicial Watch is in it for the long haul. I encourage you to support our work. We've been doing this for well over a decade. In fact, I was counting ballots. Judicial Watch was counting ballots way back in 2000 in Florida. I know how these games are played. I've been doing it longer than I probably want to admit to. 20 plus years of battling for clean elections. And those were paper ballots. So don't think just because, I know there are many people who don't like the computer systems, and I don't blame them for that, but don't think they won't try to cheat even with paper ballots. I mean, you've got to watch elections all the time. And so Judicial Watch has been instrumental in taking the lead on behalf of election integrity, and we will continue to do so despite the less efforts to try to, frankly, jail people who have questions about election integrity. So the other big issue that I'm sure conservatives are concerned about, I thought Republicans were going to win big, and obviously they didn't. They're going to barely take control of Congress, and even then, who knows? But presuming they do, it's going to have a smaller majority in Congress and in the House. In the Senate, you could actually have a slight majority in the Senate still for Republicans, depending on how at least those two races in Arizona and Nevada go. But certainly Republicans have underperformed given the political environment in which they were running. And Democrats, they should be happy. I mean, if I'm Joe Biden, I'd be like, well, this was a validation of my approach. This is, I ran on this, I'm going to bash the other side as being against democracy. I'm going to use and abuse government to suppress my political opposition. I'm going to use government to censor my political opposition. I'm going to use government to raid the homes of my political opposition. I'm going to jail my political opposition through abuse of the use of force with the FBI and Justice Department, spying on parents who are active in trying to police what their children were being taught, implying that every person who opposes him politically is a potential terrorist. It got him the votes necessary to be, to kind of say that I've been vindicated, right? I mean, that's what I'd be saying if I were him, and I think he's kind of said that. While at the same time telling Americans he's going to continue his despotic ways. He suggested that he wants to take steps to ensure that President Trump is unable to run as his opponent. And he said that he wants to launch a national security investigation into Elon Musk, who he sees as a political opponent, because not only is he being more vocally supportive of Republicans, but he's daring to express interest in having more free speech on Twitter. So, we're going to have more of the same, certainly from the Biden administration. And the question is, what are Republicans going to do? Are they going to stick with the House leadership and the Senate leadership, McConnell and McCarthy, that ran the campaigns that resulted in these big losses? And I know there are some who say that Trump was responsible and all of that. the politics are what they are. People are going to look at these results and say, and blame whoever they want to for political convenience, because it's politically useful, I should say. But as I look at this, I see certainly on the House side, the House leadership, the House campaign operations that were pushing these, the themes for the election, is that they really failed to motivate the conservative base in a way that would have had a lot of folks come out to vote. And by that, they ignored the issue of government corruption. They didn't talk much about the invasion issue. Were they running on anti-corruption issues related to Biden? Of course not. And on abortion, they were frozen. They refused to embrace the moral take that the right to life should be celebrated and extended to innocent unborn human beings. Their response to the left's promotion of abortion was silence, largely. And a little bit after, just a little bit before the election, they said, well, the other side's too extreme. Well, that wasn't obviously enough to motivate pro-life voters to come out and vote for them in large numbers. So in my view, you had this failed leadership in the House and the Senate promoting and actually being antagonistic to some of these core conservative values, and it resulted in the results that we saw. Now, for instance, do you think Kevin McCarthy is going to embrace an accountability project in the House? Is he going to say we have to impeach Biden? We need to have a broad-based impeachment inquiry, as I've suggested, or that we need to issue subpoenas, or we need to hold accountable those members of the House who are abusing their offices to target innocent Americans like they were doing on the January 6th committee? I don't think he is. So as best I can tell, many conservatives, because I'm one of them, think there needs to be a change in leadership in the House and in the Senate that better reflects at least our conservative values. And this is not a political question. This is, do we want government officials in leadership positions in the House who are not going to do the right thing for government accountability and transparency and to address the threats to the republic? Would the President of the United States threatening the jail his political opponents the day after an election? Virtual silence from the Republican leadership has story after story implicates President Biden in political corruption, RICO, racketeering type operations being run out of his vice president's office. Virtual silence. So I don't know who's going to be Speaker. Is it going to be McCarthy? I don't know. But I do know that if you have views as to who should be Speaker, you should be calling your elected representatives. Now, it may be tough to call the ones who are just elected because they may not have office numbers yet, but they could be voting as soon as next week as to who their leadership's going to be. And I'm not quite sure when the House Speaker election would take place, where that selection would take place. But you should share your views with your members, your representatives in Congress. Same thing goes for McConnell's office. Do you think McConnell should be the majority leader and or minority leader, depending on how it turns out? You know, McConnell was supportive of a lot of key measures of Biden's spending operation on transportation, and I think he supported some anti-Second Amendment regulations that Biden promoted, if I recall correctly. So, you know, you have this approach that, and it's not because I oppose Republicans because they're Republican or I oppose Democrats because they're Democrats. As an activist and as the head of Judicial Watch, a conservative organization, I think leaders should be committed to the issues that we care about, which is ensuring our republic is protected, our Constitution is vindicated, and those who are corrupt are held accountable. And if there are leaders in Congress who, in the, it's basically a congressional decision, we're going to say what we think. No one's saying don't elect them. That they're elected. The question is, what positions of influence should they have? What positions of power should they have? And that's something everyone can have a view on. So some of you may be upset about the way the elections turned out. I was surprised. I wasn't upset. But what I do know is that no matter who would win in Congress and who is going to run Congress, who's going to be the Speaker or the Majority Leader, Judicial Watch still has a lot of work to do. We have this election integrity work that is ongoing. We have litigation in Pennsylvania and Illinois to check the counting of ballots or stop the counting of ballots for up to 2 weeks, mailed ballots that arrive for up to 2 weeks after an election. Incredible. Colorado, we've got a case that's ongoing to clean up election rolls there. In New York as well. So all that has to continue, and there'll be more litigation to defend the rule of law and election integrity. And then, we have this issue of the corruption of the Biden administration. I don't know what Congress is going to do. I do know from past experience, Congress has great difficulty for a variety of reasons that I could spend a lot of time talking about, but wouldn't really get us to the point, in getting information from the executive branch. Heck, Republicans who ran Congress couldn't get information from an administration run by a Republican, the Trump administration. You had Rod Rosenstein and all the Justice Department and FBI gang refusing to turn documents over. So how do you think it's going to go for Republicans? And so if they're presuming they're running the House, when they start conducting oversight of the Biden administration, it's going to be 2 years of document fights. It doesn't mean it's not worth having. It doesn't mean it doesn't need to be done. It doesn't mean there shouldn't be oversight. But it does mean that Judicial Watch is going to be even more important than ever, because we're better than Congress at getting documents out of administrations. We've demonstrated time and time again that the FOIA lawsuits we file often get records that Congress is unable to get, whether it be on Benghazi, the IRS, the abuse of Trump. I'm going to be talking about information related to Ukraine, COVID, Fauci, you name it. There isn't a topic that Judicial Watch hasn't been able to, through FOIA, extract documents on that members of Congress aren't looking at and saying, why can't we do that? And let's not pretend they're, quote, all of a sudden going to be able to do that with this new, with the way things are likely to be over the next 2 years. So our work is going to be more essential than ever. We will continue to provide leadership in terms of challenging and exposing and trying to stop, more importantly, government corruption. And one other piece of advice I'd give members of Congress, and I do look forward to working with new members of Congress of either political party. I'm happy to talk to anyone as to what they should be doing. In many ways, we've already proven there's been criminal conduct and corruption. And the question is, what is Congress going to do about it? Do they need to look at more documents? No, that's usually an excuse not to do something substantial. If I were them, I would be looking at the issues that have already been proved. The abuse of the FBI, the abuse of the Justice Department to spy on Trump, the lies about gain-of-function research. And they should be making budgetary decisions and impeachment decisions and other accountability decisions with respect to agencies and individual employees, meaning zeroing out, for instance, the salaries of certain officials who engaged in misconduct, who are engaging in misconduct, and using the power of the purse to do the work of accountability. It's not perfect accountability. I know many of us would prefer some prosecutions here and there that we evidently are never really going to get from Durham at this point. But there are other things and tools that Congress can use to get some accountability, and I encourage them to use it, to use those tools. And it doesn't mean that Judicial Watch stops doing our work in the meantime, but our work also includes encouraging government officials to do their jobs, which isn't just to blindly spend our money, but to make sure that the money's spent well, and if there's misconduct in government, that they take steps to address it directly. So we do what we can in terms of the heavy lifting, but it's well past time for Congress to start doing their heavy lifting with respect to government corruption, oversight, and accountability. And as you know, we're well ahead of the game already on that. And so back to work. I want to also talk about this other big issue because Judicial Watch has been victimized by the government in this regard. Is what I'm calling the Great Suppression, which is the effort of government and big tech and media and other politicians in Congress and elsewhere to suppress the free speech rights of American citizens who object or just want to talk about issues in a way that the left doesn't like. You've seen it with COVID. You've seen it with elections. You've seen it with Hunter Biden, most famously, where they were suppressing information about Hunter Biden to protect Joe Biden. And now with Joe Biden in the White House, we have Joe Biden and his administration out there specifically pressuring companies and big tech to censor the thoughts and posts of tens of millions of Americans. You, I'm sure, have followed this whole conflagration created by the left with Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan is, if you don't know who he is, he's a famous podcaster. So he has essentially an interview show that appears on Spotify, which is a foreign company that makes podcasts and music available. So he's very popular. He has tens of millions of listeners every week and viewers. And Joe Rogan does something that's very dangerous from the left's perspective. He raises questions about government COVID policies. He has guests who know what they're talking about raise questions about the big government policies related to COVID and the COVID vaccines. And they have alternative views, expert views. And that's the worst type of speech for the left. People who know what they're talking about objecting to their abuses of power. So you had these leftist, quote, scientists pressure Spotify to censor him. Then you had musicians who I thought were all in favor of peace, love, and understanding and free speech, wanting to take their music off of Spotify in order to pressure Spotify to censor Joe Rogan. Now, Spotify caved. They said they're not censoring Joe Rogan, but they're going to what I call label his and other broadcasts that talked about COVID-19, evidently. I call it vandalize his episodes and the episodes of other creators on Spotify with a label saying, to see COVID-19 information, go to this hub, which of course will have government-approved speech. So when you label something in a way that suggests it's false, and to me it's outrageous that it's happening. It's suppressive. And as I call it, you're vandalizing other people's content in order to kowtow to the left. But that's not enough for the left. They want him to be completely censored. And President Biden's spokesman, Jen Psaki, the other day said more needs to be done. So you have the President of the United States, through his spokesman, pressuring private companies to censor the free speech rights of Americans. That's in violation of the U.S. Constitution, as far as I can see it, and violation of federal law. It's illegal. I hope Rogan sues them all. And of course, people like Judicial Watch get caught up in that because every time I mention COVID-19, Facebook vandalizes our page, suppresses our content, no matter what I'm saying. And we've been victimized before. We've had our material deleted by YouTube at the request of California state officials, after we highlighted their failure to clean up the rolls in California that required them to settle with us, LA County, Secretary of State's office sent emails and we're communicating with YouTube. Take down this Tom Fitton Judicial Watch video raising concerns about vote by mail by highlighting how California's lists were filthy. And we've got these fake fact checkers harassing conservative content creators all over the internet that Facebook and other entities are using as an excuse to suppress content using fact checks, which are nothing more than opinion checks. They're partisan, juvenile, ideological, and dishonest. Twitter locked me out after I posted a tweet that was perfectly accurate about a drug. I don't even know if I'm allowed to say the name of the drug. That's how crazy things are. Chinese communist-controlled TikTok just banned me for violating their rules. They didn't tell me what rules I violated or what the content was that was problematic. And I say Chinese communist-controlled TikTok, but they're no better or no worse than our own companies here in the United States. I've never seen anything like it to have the federal government pressuring private entities to suppress the free speech of Americans. I've never seen anything like it. Reuters had a story today or this week promoting censorship of people who didn't want to play ball on the COVID craziness. And they confirmed that the White House was meeting with big tech to pressure them to censor. So there's the proof. It's happening. So we have this, and that's why I'm calling it the Great Suppression. We're in the middle of it. And we have to fight back. And how do you fight back? By increasing the amount of speech on the platforms that are even oppressive, and by going to other platforms and speaking as well. And that's what Judicial Watch is trying to do. We're not leaving Facebook. We're not leaving Twitter. We're not leaving Instagram, YouTube. At least we're not leaving voluntarily, because we know that's where people are, and we're going to talk to them there. We're not going to be driven from the internet public square by the left-wing communists that want to do that. And yes, we are going to be in other places that are newer, like Telegram, like Parler, like Getter, like President Trump is coming up a new one. What's the name of the new? Truth Social is his new platform. So we'll be there. We're going to be everywhere. And I encourage you to follow us everywhere. And in case they throw us off and others off, I mean, I see Dan Bongino, our friend, was knocked off of YouTube for some fraudulent reason. You should keep in contact with us directly. Go to our website right now, judicialwatch.org. Click on the button that makes the most sense. I'm not sure what button you click on. Our marketing people are going to be going crazy. Tom, you're telling people to go to the website and not telling them what to do. Anyway, just share your email with us. Share your mailing address with us. I mean, I may be typing out letters here to you if the commies have their way. And I don't think they will. But in the meantime, it's going to be a close-run thing in terms of free speech, which is under attack now like it's never been. So forgive the rant, but we all should be concerned about it. And I suspect more than many other public policy issues, you probably face this censorship. You've had to police your own speech online as well. So I know this is something that touches a lot of people other than, big social media influencers like me at Judicial Watch. I mean, they hate me on Twitter. I mean, go look at my tweets and see the response the left has. They attack me personally. They make fun of my physical appearance. I mean, they're crazed. They hate information. They hate the truth. Which makes me want to post more material, right? And so I encourage you to take the same approach. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.